Introducing Position Group Mondays starting this week and running until the beginning of training camp. We are previewing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback situation, rankings, and projecting both Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. All of that on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into this Monday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Bucs your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can follow me, your host, David Harrison, D Harrison82 on Twitter, credential member of the media and staff writer over at BucsGameDay.com, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Here with you Monday, Wednesday, and Friday until training camp will return 5 days per week, mid to late July. But as always, I want to give a special thank you to our everydayers and your continued support of the show. On today's episode of Locked On Bucs, we're going to discuss the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback room. We're going to look at last year. We're going to look at rankings ahead of the coming season, and we're going to wrap it all up by talking about some fantasy football outlooks for your two possible starting quarterbacks. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Of course, we start this series of Monday's episodes looking at the most important position, but also the most complicated one, really, in a lot of ways at this point of the year, and that is the quarterback situation, quarterback position. And we're going to start with a year in review, looking back at 2022 for quarterbacks Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask, and John Wolford. Beginning with Mayfield, 2022, as we've discussed every day, was a very turbulent year for Baker Mayfield, who came into the league as a top pick back in 2018 in the NFL draft, coming out of the Oklahoma Sooners program. As a result of the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, however, the Cleveland Browns ultimately traded for the former Houston Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson. Mayfield was traded less than a month from training camp, and after the initial offseason workout programs had concluded to the Carolina Panthers. In return, the Panthers sent a conditional 2024 fifth-round pick, which will remain a fifth-round pick because Mayfield did not play 70% of offensive snaps for Carolina. If he had done so, then that would have been a 2024 fourth-round draft pick. Either way, quite the depreciation in value from a former top pick in the NFL draft. Instead, he played just over 30% of offensive snaps for the Carolina Panthers before being released in early December after he requested that the team do so. In total, Mayfield played 7 games for the Carolina Panthers, started 6 of them, and was 1-5 as a starting quarterback. Threw for 1,313 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, while completing 57.8% of his passes. Now, once he was released, it didn't take long for Mayfield to find a new home. He signed with the Rams on December 6th. So again, released early December, signed early December, and then amazingly led the team to a 17-16 win over the Las Vegas Raiders just 2 days later on Thursday Night Football. Mayfield played 5 games in total for the Los Angeles Rams, starting 4 of them. He was 1-3 as a starter. So they won that game against the Raiders, and then he won one more as a starter. So really, 2-3, but that's semantics. Threw for 850 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions while completing 63.6% of his passes. Now, Mayfield's contract expired at the end of the 2022 NFL season, and partially due to money, but also because the team still has Matthew Stafford on the roster. The Rams were forced to allow the quarterback to hit free agency, where he signed a 1-year deal with your Tampa Bay Buccaneers for up to $8.5 million. Now, despite being part of 3 different NFL teams, or rosters at least, in one league season, there were actually a good amount of people who felt like Mayfield had done some good things coming through this mess of a situation, really looking better and more mature, which I think was the most important part than his previous reputation had led us to believe that he was. Now, that's Baker Mayfield. For Kyle Trask, while all that was going on for Mayfield, Kyle Trask, his 2022, a little bit less eventful from a personal standpoint, but also much less active. Trask did play in his first NFL regular season game in December of 2022, but it came in a 30-17 loss to the Atlanta Falcons. It goes down as Tom Brady's only loss in his entire career to the Atlanta Falcons. And Trask only threw 9 passes while playing on 10 snaps in the Week 18 loss. In those 9 passes, Trask completed 3 of them, gained 23 yards, and gained 1 first down. But that would be the end of his day. Trask got much more work in the 2022 preseason, where he completed 64% of his 67 pass attempts for 457 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. His best game of the preseason, I was fortunate enough to be in the press box, witness it firsthand, came in the first game of the preseason following joint practices with the Miami Dolphins. Trask completed 75% of his passes, threw for 258 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and was also sacked twice in a 26-24 loss. Now, again, lost that game, but in that game, Trask did show some good things. Also had some really bad moments, had a really bad stretch towards the end of the first half there, which is to be expected sometimes from a young quarterback, but I thought he bounced back fairly nicely with limited playing time. And that brings us to John Wolford, who went undrafted in 2018 out of Wake Forest, got a training camp invite from the Jets, played 1 preseason game for them, and then ultimately was cut. Then he played for the short-lived AAF with the Arizona Hotshots, eventually landed on the Rams practice squad in 2019. In 2020, Wolford was elevated to the active roster to back up Jared Goff and made his first NFL game appearance in a start in Week 17 of 2020 in an 18-7 win over the Arizona Cardinals that clinched a playoff spot for the Los Angeles Rams. It was interesting. Something that I read said that John Wolford became the first undrafted quarterback to get his first start at the end of the season in a game where his team needed a win to clinch a playoff spot. That's a deep pull from someone in the stats department, but that is how Wolford's career started. But now he's with the Buccaneers after signing a 1-year, $895,000 contract as a free agent after the Rams didn't extend him a qualifying offer as a restricted free agent, so left him to sign where he chose. Wolford did play in 3 games in 2022, but he only threw passes in 2 of those games, and in those 2 games, he completed 61% of his passes for 390 yards, 1 touchdown, and he had 3 interceptions. Now, I think it's important to understand that Wolford was that third game, right? So that, again, the 3 starts, that third game where he didn't throw a pass is because he was nursing a neck injury coming into that game, wanted to play for his team. The team decided apparently that he was healthy enough to kind of give it a go. So they went ahead, they put him out there, but they only put him out there for 1 drive. In that drive, again, obviously, he didn't throw any passes. A single pass came out after that drive. That is the game that Baker Mayfield came in. So Mayfield actually started his time with the Rams coming in as a backup to John Wolford because, obviously just signed with the team 2 days prior. But Wolford, because of the injury, whatever happened on that first drive basically made him or the trainers or a combination of them and the coaches decide that Wolford was not really ready to go. So they went ahead, pulled him, put Baker Mayfield in, starting the second offensive possession for the Rams against the Raiders, which is why, to me personally, I say Baker Mayfield is 2 and 3 as a Rams quarterback. I know he didn't start that game, but second drive on, he came in and got the Rams the win there. So again, that's semantics, call it whatever you want, but that is how 2022 went on the field for your 3 Buccaneers quarterbacks. And coming up in just a moment, we're going to take a look at where this quarterback room ranks in the NFC South division, in the NFC, and in the NFL, thanks to with the help of some national outlets that look at the entire NFL on a fairly regular basis while we focus on your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We're going to take a peek at how they're expected to perform in 2023. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Bucs is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get into the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers, you can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon today to join. The Tampa Bay Rays currently have the 3rd best odds of winning the World Series, and a $100 bet right now for them to do so wins you $480 if they pull it off. If you use your max no sweat first bet on the Rays to win, and they win, then you win $4,800. It's a lot of winning going on there. And if they lose, you get your $1,000 bet back in the form of free bets that you can use on other wagers. Maybe you want to double down on the Rays and put another $1,000, this time in free bets, on them to win next year's World Series. That would be an entertaining prospect. If you're looking for Buccaneers action right now, a $100 bet for the Buccaneers to win the Super Bowl this coming season will earn you a profit of $7,500 if Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask can do what nobody thinks they can do. So don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to fanduel.com/locked on to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks again for making a Locked On Bucs your first listen or your first view today and every day. Again, beginning our Monday position preview series, and we're starting off with the quarterback position. This Monday, we will do a new position group every Monday from here to training camp. And in order to do so, we are going to combine the receivers and tight ends into one position group preview. So we're not going to be able to talk about every single receiver and tight end the way that we just did about the quarterbacks, but we will talk about as many as we can, and certainly the key players. And then we're also going to combine the D linemen and outside or D linemen and linebackers into one group as well for the purposes of getting all of the position groups covered before we hit training camp. So make sure you're coming through every Monday for those. But for today, we're going to continue our conversation about the quarterbacks, and we're looking at their outlook and their rankings. So we're looking at divisional rankings, conference rankings, and league rankings. And well, I don't cover the entire league. I don't cover the National Football League. So I only watch what I cover, right? We tend to focus on our job, not everybody else's job. So to bring us the wide lens look at national rankings, we're going to look at some national experts like PFF. We're going to look at SI.com. We're going to look at 33rd Team as well. So from a national aspect, it's important to note most of these outlets, if not all of them, are using Baker Mayfield as the starting quarterback when ranking the position groups this offseason and every dayers. You know that we expect Baker Mayfield to be the starter, but I am going to give Todd Bowles and offensive coordinator Dave Canales some credit. They said they wanted this to be a competition. They are certainly keeping it a competition, splitting reps, doing all those things, and they're going to hold this thing as a true competition until the end of camp or preseason or whatever comes first. That being said, here are the league rankings that we found from national outlets. PFF ranks Baker Mayfield the 28th starting quarterback in the National Football League, saying, quote, "It's difficult to argue that Mayfield's 2022 season was easily predictable, but it's equally difficult to maintain any kind of lofty expectations for him going forward after witnessing it. His 50.6 PFF grade on the year was 13 grading points lower than his previous career worst mark, which involved a torn shoulder, and it speaks volumes that the Rams were happy to let him walk after he led the team to a remarkable win just after stepping off the plane after they traded for him. Mayfield has very good play on his NFL resume, but it's getting harder and harder to see it in the rearview mirror." End quote. Now, we talked about this quote a little while back every day, as you'll probably remember the conversation, because the Rams were not happy to let him walk. They didn't have a choice. They couldn't sign him to an $8.5 million contract to back up Matt Stafford with their financial situation. And also, they didn't trade for him. They signed him. So some inaccuracies there from PFF. But nonetheless, they rank him the 28th overall quarterback in the league, starting quarterback in the league this year. SI.com has Baker Mayfield a little bit higher, 26th. But SI.com says, quote, "Even if you thought the Cleveland Browns had a ceiling with Mayfield, he had some very impressive moments in 4 seasons after being selected number 1 overall. It's hard to read too much into his split season last year with the Carolina Panthers and Los Angeles Rams, and he clearly wasn't healthy for his final season in Cleveland. The belief here is that at a minimum, Mayfield is one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the NFL, but he needs to leave no doubt about that in 2023, or he'll be a backup moving forward," end quote. And I think that this interesting 2022 season that Baker Mayfield went through with the Cleveland Browns, Carolina Panthers, and the Los Angeles Rams, I think it's I pretty much agree with what everybody's saying here, that it's really hard to do what he did, but also do it well. And the fact that he was able to lead this team or his teams to combine 4 or 5 wins or so. I know he didn't start the one game against the Raiders. We already talked about that, but the fact that he was able to do that, I mean, you think about how quarterbacks will struggle in new offenses when they're there at the hiring of the coordinator, right? You have quarterbacks all the time who get a new offensive coordinator in the early part of the offseason. And then they have all that time to kind of learn, study, get notes from the coach of what they're going to expect from them, all these things. And then they have the OTAs, they have the mini camp, they have the full training camp as the guy. And we still see a lot of struggles across the NFL almost on a yearly basis with new offense coordinators. So for Baker Mayfield to go into Carolina and literally your first introduction to this offense is training camp, like you're already getting ready for a preseason game. That's putting you hugely behind the 8 ball. Then you go to the Rams, and 2 days later, you're coming into a primetime game in the NFL with barely any knowledge of the playbook. I think that is being a little bit understated. And then also, the lack of social media posts and snarky, I mean, he's Baker Mayfield, so maybe a little bit was snarky, but like really, incendiary kind of comments in the media. I think it really kind of showed like there's still talent in Baker Mayfield, but I think from a mental standpoint, there's a little bit of maturity there. And 33rd team kind of talked about that when they ranked him 28th in the NFL, saying, quote, "Do you know how hard it is to join a team, learn a new playbook a few hours later, and then lead a team to a comeback win against the Raiders on Thursday Night Football? I'll tell you, it's hard." Baker Mayfield did that. He also proved what he needed to prove in 2022, that he can be an NFL quarterback. Given the Rams cap situation, it'll just likely happen with a different team in 2023, end quote. And that's exactly what happened here with Baker Mayfield and the Rams. It wasn't the Rams were happy to see him leave or anything like that. I think that's really a really bad steer into an already negative narrative for no reason. But everybody has their outlook on it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're right, but I do know that the Rams didn't trade for Baker Mayfield. So there's that. I will say this, final thing on that, again, these guys are all ranking Baker Mayfield, really not a lot of rankings for Kyle Trask. But when you look at the averages there from those national outlets, you've got Baker Mayfield sitting about 27th in the NFC. PFF has him 14th in the NFC, SI 13th, 33rd team 14th. So the average is 14th out of 16 starting quarterbacks in the NFC. The NFC South is my rankings. I cover the NFC South. I cover the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so I pay attention to these teams. So this is where I'm going to put my opinion out there. I've got Derek Carr as the top quarterback in the NFC South right now. His veteran history, obviously his leadership has been lauded, throughout the years. Number two, I'm putting Baker Mayfield of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers number two. Again, that's what everybody's using as a starting quarterback, so I'm going to kind of follow suit there. Number three, I'm putting Desmond Ridder. Number four, I'm putting Bryce Young. And I want to say this, I'm the type of guy that Bryce Young, he hasn't stepped on an NFL field yet, so I have no business putting him above anybody else. We want to talk about projections and ceilings and all that stuff. Okay, fine. But we're talking about what we expect from this quarterback coming into the season. And if you expect anything from Bryce Young as of right now, it's purely speculation. And yes, all of these are a little bit of speculation, but they at least have a little bit of history around them as well. Desmond Ridder actually, I mean, he's not, he didn't do a lot of great things, I suppose. But no interceptions thrown by Desmond Ridder. If Kyle Trask was the starting quarterback for this team, that's actually how I would do that. Derek Carr would be number one, but then Desmond Ridder would be number two. 2-2 in 4 games as a starter last year for the Falcons, completed over 60% of his passes, 708 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. I mean, again, not great blow your mind type of numbers, but efficient, smart football. And I think that's what you want. That projects out to over 3,000 yards in a full season and 9 touchdowns. Again, not amazing numbers, right? But that no interception number for a young quarterback in his first 4 starts, that's very impressive. I'm not sure how many quarterbacks have done that in the NFL. I would put Kyle Trask third, right above Bryce Young. Again, haven't seen anything from Bryce Young, so it's really hard to expect anything from Bryce Young at this point. We're just making it up and transposing Alabama football onto the Carolina Panthers, which I don't like to do. So those are our rankings, national rankings, NFC South rankings, my personal NFC South rankings. Like I said, again, the national media, Baker Mayfield is a starter in their eyes. Kyle Trask certainly in the mix in the battle, thanks to Coach Bowles and Coach Canales kind of keeping true to their word. Minicamp notes definitely lean more towards Baker Mayfield than they did Kyle Trask, but still a lot left in this competition to go through before an official starter is named. That official starter could possibly land on your fantasy football roster if you aim for them and if you just need a backup quarterback or a quarterback in general in the area that they're being drafted, where that could be, where they could help you. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Wrapping up this episode, quarterback position group preview, looking at some fantasy outlook options from Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterbacks, Baker Mayfield mostly, but also Kyle Trask, John Wolford not getting a lot of fantasy love and not getting a lot of national rankings love either. So that's why he's kind of falling out of this conversation. But we're going to look at PFF, we're going to look at Fantasy Pros, and we're going to look at Yahoo Fantasy when it comes to fantasy outlooks. Pro Football Focus has Baker Mayfield in their 6th tier of quarterbacks, ranked as the number 32nd overall quarterback in the NFL. These tiers, tier 1, high-end passers with high-end rushing ability. Tier 2, choose your fighter types, high-end rusher or high-end passer. Tier 3, pushing for a high rate of weekly top 12 finishes. Tier 4, established fantasy quarterbacks that we can mostly rely on. Tier 5, high-end question mark QBs. Tier 6, injured Kyler Murray and low floor QBs. And Tier 7, so you're saying there's a chance. Personally, I would put Baker Mayfield in Tier 5, high-end question mark QBs. Again, with guys like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin to throw to. And the last time we saw Baker Mayfield playing healthy and with some time to actually learn the system, he was doing pretty well. So I would put him in Tier 5, but, we're splitting hairs there. Tier 6 is where PFF puts him, ranks number 32nd overall. Kyle Trask is in that 7th tier. So that is so you're saying there's a chance tier of quarterbacks, number 50 of 50. So he is the last quarterback they actually took time to rank on this list. Now, Fantasy Pros has Baker Mayfield in Tier 5, but they don't really label their tiers with titles. And while Tier 5 certainly is higher than Tier 6, they actually have Baker Mayfield as their 33rd overall quarterback, where PFF had him number 32. So it's actually a worse ranking, despite the fact that the tier numbering is higher, just difference in how people break up their tiers. Now, Fantasy Pros has Baker Mayfield ranked after Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers, which, given Brock Purdy's performance last year, I would actually fall in line with, but before Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans, which, I would certainly agree with that as well. Kyle Trask is in Fantasy Pros' 6th tier of quarterbacks. He's the number 39th overall quarterback, so 6 spots after Baker Mayfield. They have Kyle Trask coming off the board after Jameis Winston with the New Orleans Saints, but before Bailey Zappi of the New England Patriots. So other backup quarterbacks. So clearly Fantasy Pros viewing Kyle Trask as the backup to be. Yahoo Fantasy has Baker Mayfield number 32nd overall, his highest. And so the way that the Yahoo guys do it is they have a bunch of different experts and they each rank the position. So they each rank the quarterbacks, and then they take each person's ranking of a specific quarterback, average it out, and that gives you your total. So Baker Mayfield's average was number 32. Now his highest ranking from the experts that we were able to see, number 21 overall, which is significantly higher by Andy Behrens. His lowest ranking, number 34 overall, by Matt Harmon. Now he comes, according to the Yahoo compiled rankings, right, the average, number 32 ranking. That's after Mac Jones of the New England Patriots, but before CJ Stroud of the Houston Texans. Now, they don't have, Yahoo Fantasy doesn't have Kyle Trask ranked on their list, unfortunately. So where would I draft Baker Mayfield if I'm looking at it now? I can't run down, or, I'm not going to run down an entire kind of quarterback by quarterback listing of fantasy quarterbacks and where I would rank them. So I'm going to say I would draft Baker Mayfield after Justin Herbert. So Justin Herbert, kind of looking at my kind of list of quarterbacks, Justin Herbert is the quarterback that I put right above Baker Mayfield as far as that is concerned. And that might surprise some of you because you might have some quarterbacks that I have kind of in the mix there, maybe not in the mix. So, again, take it with a grain of salt because I'm not listing my entire list of quarterbacks to you. If you got Justin Herbert as like a top 3 quarterback, no, I'm not saying Baker Mayfield's top 4. What I'm telling you is I probably have Justin Herbert a little bit lower than you do, and maybe that's where you want to get mad at me. Now, I've also got him going. I've got Baker Mayfield going before Daniel Jones. But if you ever listen to Locked On Commanders and we talk NFC East, you'll find out I am not a Daniel Jones believer. So, take that for what it's worth. Kyle Trask, where am I drafting Kyle Trask? I'm drafting, if he's the starter, if he's the starting quarterback, I'm drafting Kyle Trask after Derek Carr of the New Orleans Saints. I like that veteran stability a little bit more with the, kind of unknown of Kyle Trask as a starter, but I'm drafting him before Mac Jones of the New England Patriots, which makes it a little bit more interesting that Yahoo Fantasy has Baker Mayfield after Mac Jones. I would definitely draft Baker Mayfield before Mac Jones, given the situation there in New England with the New England Patriots. Coming up tomorrow, James is going to be back, and he's going to be back with Evan Klosky, so make sure you come back for that. In the meantime, if you've got questions, you can leave them in the YouTube comments, email them lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com, or you can hit us up on Twitter and let us know what you want to know. Thank you so much for making Locked On Bucs your first listen of the day every day, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine. If you have anything else Buccaneers related you want to know or discuss, make sure you also follow us on Twitter at @JYarcho_Bucs, DHarrison82, and at Locked On Bucs. Until we speak again, be safe, be kind, fire the cannons. I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.